We were going through the Ten Commandments, and we got through the first 5, and you notice that several of them don't mean what people tend to think they mean. That's why you take a course. We're on the 6th commandment, which is not to murder, and that's always been a bit of a confusion, especially since the King James English, which translated it as you shall not kill. And so this has always become kind of an issue among people. Does it mean not to murder or not to kill? To murder is normally understood as taking a human life for some negative reason, such as you either hate the person or you want to rob the person or something like that. Whereas killing could mean all kinds of taking of human life. It could mean by accident, it could mean in self-defense, it could be mercy killing, it could be killing an animal, all of that. But murder, by definition, only means taking a human life for some reason that involves malice, something negative. In Hebrew, as in English, there are 2 different words, and the word that is used there, retzach, is the word that means murder. It means taking a human life for some male intention. So you have to be very careful about it because, obviously in our age, a lot of people apply it to the abortion issue. And I'm not going to go into something here to try to persuade you for or against it or taking a side on that, but rather that you should understand that what you can't do is just say, there's the 6th commandment, that's good enough for me, abortion is wrong. You can't do that. You would have to argue that to do an abortion would be consistent with the things that are forbidden by that word in that commandment. So whether you're pro or anti-abortion, you have to make your case linguistically or historically on what that word must really mean. I put this in a book called The Bible Now that I wrote together with Shauna Delansky a few years ago, where we took abortion, homosexuality, capital punishment, the earth, and woman's status, 5 sort of obvious hot issues, and treated them in terms of the Bible. And where we really tried just to put it in terms of the evidence, not our taking a specific side on the issue ourselves. And it was my worst-selling book. And we imagined, this book's going to be hot. It's got abortion, it's got homosexuality, capital punishment. This is a big one. And what I learned from a really smart editor and agent is books like that don't sell at all. And you picture the editor hears about your book. This is the most even, balanced treatment of some controversial subject, let's say it's abortion, ever written. And they take it to the editorial meeting of the board of the publishers, and they say, it's fair, it's both sides, this is great. The editorial board will unanimously vote it down, and they won't publish the book. And the reason for that is most people on issues like that have taken a side, and they really aren't interested in a balanced treatment of the 2 sides. They want somebody who takes one side and says that that's right. And somebody else will buy a book, on the other side and says that's right. But a book that's fair and just giving the evidence, I have no interest in that at all. So I didn't make the millions I was supposed to make on that book. I just thought I'd tell you that. It's out there. It's called The Bible Now. If any of you want to buy it, I might make another quarter or something, out of that one. The next commandment is not to commit adultery. Adultery in biblical terms, in the Hebrew Bible, is sex between a man and a married woman. You got that? Sex between a man and a married woman. It is not biblically adultery if it's sex between a single woman and a married man. Is this unfair, male chauvinist, sexist? Yeah. But why? The reason is because there was something underlying that was male-controlled that was the determiner here, and that's that they had polygamy. I remember Goldie Hawn on television show The Laugh-In in the 70s, who used to say, don't make fun of polygamies, they can't help it if they're short. Okay, I covered that race. Check that, get a list of all the races and ethnic groups and religions, and we'll get them all by the end. They had polygamy. A man could be married and have other wives, concubines, girlfriends, dates, prostitutes, affairs, and all of that was not a violation because men were allowed to have more than one woman. So the only way a man could commit adultery is if he slept with a woman who was married to another man. Then it's adultery. And the punishment is equal. So on the one hand, if there's adultery, both the woman and the man suffer the same punishment, which, by the way, is capital punishment, execution for that. But it's not the other. Now, I wrote I'm selling all my books today. I wrote a book, a commentary on the Torah, where I said that worked fine as long as you were in a polygamous system. But today, nearly all Jews and Christians, not Muslims, are monogamous, or at least the rules of their religions are that you're supposed to be monogamous. Therefore, I would say under the present, if you live in a monogamous world, then it's equal either way, the woman or the man, whoever has the affair. So guys, I'm sorry, I'm a traitor to my sex. I'm saying that we can't cheat either, so I'm sorry. You look, it's so sad. It's the saddest thing I saw since I was lecturing to a lot of pre-med type students, and I said I had my best friend is like a brilliant diagnostician. He's one of those guys who, whenever people come into our apartment that we shared in our student days, and they say, "Oh, you're a doctor. Listen, I've got this pain. I've been to 50 specialists. Nobody can help me. Could you?" And he would sit them down. He'd ask them a few questions, and he'd nail it every time. And I watched him do this. I said, "How do you do that?" And he said, "Because everybody thinks the practice of medicine is a science, but it's an art." And I go, whoa. And then I'd watch all my pre-med students sitting across and they're going, "Oh, like, I think I better switch over to history." It's like, you know. That's the reaction when I tell guys, you know, really you can't cheat either. But in the biblical world you could, and it was okay. So if you can get a time machine, you can go back there and, you know. The eighth commandment is you shall not steal, and that means you're not supposed to steal. It's one of the commandments that really just means what it seems to mean. The ninth commandment is not to bear false witness. That refers to in a trial. Now you might say, but wait a minute, we already had a commandment that says you can't take the name of Yahweh in vain. So if you'd swear in an oath to tell the truth in a trial and then you bear false witness, you're actually violating two commandments. So what do we need this commandment to do? And I think the answer to that is that we're just assuming that in ancient trials they had you take an oath because we take oaths in trials. But maybe in a trial nobody else did. You couldn't place your hand on the Bible because the Bible wasn't done yet. You know, nothing. So you'd fall down if you put your hand on the Bible. So they couldn't say cross your heart, because we're still 1,000 years before that. So I mean, what were they supposed to do? So people didn't swear an oath. They would just, you know, they were supposed to be witnesses. So there was a commandment that said not to do that. And the 10th commandment is the hardest to understand, not to covet. It's a commandment that, after all, that's commanding you about an emotion. And just as the commandment you'll have later in Deuteronomy to love the Lord your God, a commandment to love, a commandment not to covet, these are very strange. And so people for a couple thousand years have argued over the interpretation of these things, if it means getting your emotions under control. I mean, it's recognizing that we do feel envy and coveting, and we do feel love without being required to, and all sorts of things that it means that you can take some role of decision-making in your own emotions. That's the best I can do with it, because I admit it's hard for me as well. Notice that the commandments aren't just in any old order. We usually make the distinction in commandments between ritual commandments and ethical commandments. Ritual commandments regard ceremonies and things like keeping the Sabbath, observing the holidays, everything to do with sacrifice, incense burning, special clothing to wear, all the kinds of things in a religion that involve aesthetic things. There are the music, actions, special foods you eat on some holidays or whatever. Ethical commandments are about human behavior. Don't murder, don't steal, that kind of thing. So that some people make the distinction. Ritual commandments are commandments between the individual and God. Ethical commandments are between the individual and other human beings. And that distinction will work for almost all of them. And then, of course, you could take some commandments of the Bible and they work both ways. They have both a ritual and an ethical aspect to them. There's no point in fighting with somebody else. It's ritual, it's ethical, it's ritual, it's ethical. There are some things in life that do that. We humans are very, we're bicameral. Most of us are fairly symmetrical. Not some of us are more symmetrical than others, and our brains and we have two of a lot of things, and no jokes. And we naturally see the world in twos. And so they always say there's two kinds of people, those who divide people into two groups and those who don't. It's our nature to want to define things this way, and almost nothing in the world really works this way. It's all inside our brains and senses that we're doing that. But understand that this particular distinction is a pretty good one and works most of the time. And then you look at the Ten Commandments, and the first four are ritual commandments about taking God's name in vain and making statues and not having other gods and observing the Sabbath. The last five are all ethical commandments: murder, steal, adultery. And right the middle, the pivotal commandment between the ritual commandments and the ethical commandments is honor your father and your mother. I mean, that's very cool. Even little kids in Sunday school say, what do you do if you're in a conflict, where you're in some situation where you're caught between two commandments? Sunday school kids say, well, what if your parents tell you to steal? Do you honor your parents or do you steal? Good luck, kids. Make your choice. I mean, you could say, well, you're bringing dishonor on your parents if you steal, so disobeying them is the honorable thing. I mean, but the point is that life is never quite as simple as our bicameral bodies would like it to be. And that's why law becomes very complex. And that's why there's a law school that's just overwhelmed with books across the grass from here, because once you start a legal system, it expands, it expands, it expands. But there is one thing I can tell you biblically. If you're ever in a situation where you're caught between two commands like that, and one of them is one of the big 10, and one is one of the other of the commandments of the Bible, you'll see that the biblical principle is the 10 commandments have a higher status than the other commandments of the Bible. So if you're caught between those two, you got to keep the 10 commandments. And you'll see I'll give you at least two cases where you won't be real happy with what happens. But there are hierarchies in law, and some laws are more important than others. Like beating up women in elevators is a bigger one, than a violation of the infield fly rule. I picked that because nobody knows what it means anyway. So that's the 10 commandments, and they are the big ones. The full number of commandments, I'm told, in the 5 books of Moses, the first 5 books of the Bible, is 613. And that is a tradition I have never counted. I'm never going to. They were first counted by Maimonides, a medieval rabbi, physician, and scholar. And he just wrote a book, the Mishneh Torah, that listed the 613 commandments outright. And what's really interesting is one of the 613 commandments is a Jew can never go to Egypt. God says you don't go back to Egypt. And Maimonides was living in Egypt at the time that he wrote this, so it sort of gives you the message that nobody can do it all. And then Exodus culminates with the consecration of the tabernacle. So I said you should read quickly through some of these things, like all the cubits of the tabernacle, and we'll get back to that sort of thing later. But the last chapter of Exodus you should read. Understand It's the culmination of the book. The book has been about God making himself known in the world. The last chapter of the book is they consecrate this tabernacle, the place where from now on God is going to communicate with humankind. So even after they leave Mount Sinai, it's no more this God's voice from the top of the mountain. It's you go into the tabernacle, which means Moses, you find out what God wants, and then you go out and tell everybody. It's in Exodus 32 that, Exodus 34, that Moses comes down from the mountain, and it says when the people saw him, they were afraid and they ran away from him. And after that, for the rest of his life, Moses would wear a veil over his face because he scared everyone. And when he would take the veil away, it would be just when to talk, give the word of God to people, and then he'd put the veil back on. And people have always argued about what that means. The verb that's used in the text is that the skin of Moses' face, karan, in Hebrew. And karan, the noun form of that word, means a horn. And this may be the origin of the horned Moses, if you've ever seen the famous Michelangelo statue of Moses in the St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, or if you've seen pictures of it, Moses has horns. That's not in St. Peter's where the Pope is. It's in the Basilica of St. Peter in chains. So don't do the dumb thing I did when I was a student making my first European tour, going through Rome, and I went to the Vatican, and I'm looking everywhere for Moses and can't find him, and didn't realize it's in the San Pietro in Vincoli, the St. Peter in Chains, which is a separate church on the other side of town. And you should see it because it's great. But there are actually a couple hundred of these statues and paintings that picture Moses with horns. It may be the thing that led to a medieval, and occasionally in Athens, Georgia, comment by people that Jews have horns. And I had mine done by an excellent plastic surgeon, and threw in some Botox for free. It was a very good deal. And so it's not horns. It's not that Moses comes down and he's got horns. So then people say that Karan is like you've ever seen like a big ram's horn. It's like that his face beamed. So it's picturing beaming light coming out of his face. And mostly this happened, I think, because it said it was the skin of his face that Karan. And the word for skin in Hebrew is the Hebrew or. And the word for light in Hebrew is the Hebrew word or, which sound very similar, except this one, the Hebrew letter ayin, was pronounced in biblical times with a guttural, so it was or, and this was just or. In modern Hebrew, very few, like Israelis who speak Hebrew, even distinguish between these anymore. And when we teach Hebrew here, we don't force the students to do the guttural ayin. We Americans just aren't good with gutturals. My colleague here who teaches Arabic is Dr. Adel Amir, and I try really hard when I talk to Adel to say his name right because I don't want to offend him. He's my colleague, but it's really hard for us Americans to do gutturals. And because these two words look a lot alike, and it's a word that looks like to have horns, so people are confused. So they say, as a second choice of what it means, that his face was like beaming light. That may or may not be the origin of the idea of halos that then you start to see in Renaissance painting and that sort of thing. I really don't know.
Bill Props.
I'm glad you asked me that because that's what I want to go to next. When I was at UC San Diego, my colleague William Propp, who's the leading Exodus scholar in the world, he wrote a 2-volume commentary on Exodus, which is the greatest Exodus ever written. And it took him 10 years to do volume 1, 10 years to do volume 2, and then he said, I'm never doing Bible research again. And now all he does is play the bassoon and teaches classes. He won't do any scholarship at all. He's just burned out. 20 years of Exodus will do that. And but he had this other suggestion that the word Quran, as I said, means a horn. And he said can be at the skin of Moses' face becomes like a horn, which is, keratin, just like your skin, except it's more intense and hard. And that's why it goes all the way into English. When you have like a corn on your foot that's treated by a doctor, that comes from this Hebrew. Or the Greek word for horn, kornos, like as in cornucopia, is all of those are related words. There are not that many words that derive the same from Hebrew and from Greek, and this happens to be one of them. And he says, look, Moses has been up on the mountain. The mountain is on fire. He's been there for 40 days and 40 nights. And he comes down, and his face is disfigured. And that's why when people see him, they're horrified and afraid, and they run away. And he wears a veil for the rest of his life. And he wrote an article, published it years ago, called The Skin of Moses' Face, Transfigured or Disfigured. And the first time he put this idea on me, like always, when you hear a new idea on Bible from somebody, you go, no, Bill, no, come on, it's not that he's old. By the time I was done reading the article, I was persuaded that that's at the very least the most likely solution to what's going on here. Might be wrong, but it's a better case than anything else I've seen. So now you know as much as I know about it. Now let's go through some of these laws. After the Ten Commandments, there's 3 chapters of law, Exodus 21, 22, 23, and they're called the Covenant Code. So you should note this because there's several bodies of law in the Bible. One is the Covenant Code. Later when we get to Leviticus, we get to the priestly law code. And then in Deuteronomy, there's a third one called the Deuteronomic Law Code. Sometimes these 3 main codes of the Bible overlap each other and have the same law word for word in both. Sometimes they have the same law but worded differently, so you're not exactly sure if it's the same law. And sometimes they have actual laws that appear to conflict with each other. So it's this massive law. We'll take them one at a time. At the moment, let's start with the Covenant Code in Exodus, but we will get to Leviticus today too. So, for example, I'll pick out some. If there are any that when you were reading you found these laws strange or interesting or you have a question, feel free to ask. Famous one is Exodus 22:17 in the Law Code, right around the middle of it, which says you have to burn a witch. If Hermione walked in this room right now, I would not burn her. I just want everybody to be clear on that. Or McGonagall, I would not. That one in pink, I'd burn her ass. I mean, definitely, whatever her name is, that one. Thank you. I knew you all, some of you would know. My memory is getting worse. What was the hero's name again? Harry something? So, and people made a big deal of this, and it was a famous thing in American history. In New England, there was a period where women were accused of being witches and were burned. And you say, well, why witches and not sorcerers? Why would you burn Hermione and not Harry? And the answer appears to be in the Greek text where it's a plural and it's not just singular female. And I think the original text just meant either a witch or whatever you think the word is, warlock, sorcerer, or whatever. It's all forbidden. And you'll see cases, we already addressed this in the Egyptian case with the Egyptian magicians, that the biblical authors really did believe in magic. I mean real magic, not stage magic. And so it's not that they thought it didn't work, but they thought it was forbidden, and you mustn't do it. And so a sorcerer or sorceress is to be executed. Now, since I wrote a book that I mentioned that one of the whole chapters was on capital punishment, and you're going to see a lot of these crimes suffer capital punishment, whereas in the world today things have changed quite a bit. In Western Europe, almost none of the countries do capital punishment. Most of the industrialized countries of the world, the highly educated countries of the world, do not practice capital punishment. A notable exception is the United States, where it goes state by state, and the majority of states do have capital punishment. Some states don't. But even in the United States, it's very, very limited. The Supreme Court has ruled that in the US, you can only have execution for a crime in which somebody died, or else it's not considered just. And I think the one exception to that is treason. But otherwise, you have to commit a crime where somebody dies in order to be executed. So a rape, no matter how much any of us may be disgusted by rape and think it's a horrible thing, and no matter how bad the rape is, you cannot execute somebody for rape in the United States. Whereas in biblical law, the penalty for rape is execution. In the US today, you can't burn somebody for being a witch, even if you could really prove she's really a witch. We can't do that. But in biblical times, you could. So there are a lot of crimes. I added them up once. I think it was 26. It's in there somewhere between 25 and 30 crimes in the Hebrew Bible for which you can be executed, compared to only a couple in the US and none in France for which you can be executed. What should we make of that? You should be very cautious of that, and I don't think you should use it if you wanted to make a case for execution. If you wanted to say, well, execution, capital punishment must be okay because the Bible says so, because Bible does it. And the reason why I say that is, in the biblical world, they had very few options. Prison wasn't invented yet. We have never archaeologically excavated a prison. I know there are stories in the Bible, like when Joseph was imprisoned by Potiphar and he ends up with these other prisoners of the Pharaoh. But if you look, it says he was put in this special place where they had prisoners of the Pharaoh. And the other prisoners they were trying to are these special cases of people who had offended the Pharaoh personally. It's not like they built prisons in Egypt and they held trials and then they sentenced you to a week or 2 weeks in prison.
What about Jeremiah? Was that kind of prison that he was thrown into?
Yeah, there are these few cases like Jeremiah, Samson, a couple of others where somebody is put in some kind of holding thing. In one case, Jeremiah is put in something that is apparently like the stocks, some kind of device where you're either held sitting or upside down or whatever. In one, he's put in this thing that's some kind of like a deep pit or something like that. But even that isn't what we mean normally, like today. It's never what anybody would picture when you said prison. That's, I think, the case of Jeremiah is a singular case. Samson, who is imprisoned by the Philistines, he's put in the mill house and he's locked in there and he's chained to the mill thing and he has to go around and work forever. But it's very hard to come up with any case in the Bible that suggests long-term institutions of holding people as a penalty for a crime. And so what else is there? If you don't have prison, well, you have exile. There's not a single case of punishment for an individual of a crime by exile in the Bible. You have whipping, beating, hitting, physical punishment of some kind. There are only a couple of cases in the Bible where you're allowed to whip somebody, and there's a limit on the number of whacks you can give the person, and it certainly wouldn't be enough that would add up. You'd say it's a fair punishment for murder, for example. Money penalties. You pay a fine for committing a crime. They do have that in the Bible. If you commit a robbery, you pay the amount that you stole plus a percentage of it. So you have to pay back more than you took. So there's that kind of thing. But it's very limited. For big crimes especially, they simply didn't have the means that the things we have, which, you can have house arrest, you can have prison, you can have, parole. They don't have any of that. And so in a society that doesn't have any of that, they are more inclined to execute. They're not equipped to put you away for 20 years, so they kill you. And it seems to me that you can be for capital punishment or against it. Again, I'm not arguing a case, but rather that if you want to make your position on capital punishment based on the Bible, don't be too quick to say, well, the Bible allows capital punishment, therefore capital punishment is okay. You would have to argue more sophisticatedly, complicatedly, for taking all the factors into account to make your decision whether you think that that adds up to any implication for your present view of that or not. In Exodus 22:20, it says, "You shall not persecute an alien, and you shall not oppress him." A little farther down it says, "You know the alien's soul, because you were aliens in Egypt." In some of the older translations, they don't use the word alien, they use the word stranger, since the King James. It means a person is not a member of your group, member of your society. I mean, this is an obvious issue in our own lives, a question about legal aliens, illegal aliens, green-carded aliens, all of that in the United States. You don't want to get in trouble in the INS if you're a visitor to the U.S. Any of you who are here from Canada or Mexico, you know what I'm talking about. The INS are not easy, Immigration and Naturalization Service. But the point of this is tremendous, that there's this constant concern with how you treat people who are living in your country but aren't citizens of your country. And look, these first 5 books of the Bible, the 5 books of Moses, are called the Torah. So the word Torah can mean the Torah, the whole first 5 books of the Bible, or it can mean individual laws are Torah. It's a word that's usually translated law. It's interesting. It's a Hebrew word that comes from a root meaning to teach or to shoot. I think that's very funny. But anyway, if any of you become teachers, you'll like it a lot. That this word, the first time the word Torah occurs in the Torah is in Exodus 12, where it says, "You shall have one Torah for the citizen and for the alien." And when I joke with you about that you don't want business with the INS, it's not entirely a joke. In the United States, if you are a resident alien, legal or illegal, you do not have the same rights as a U.S. citizen. There are certain cases, matters that could come up in court where you do not have all the protections of law that a U.S. citizen does, and that's the law. Now you can say that's right or that's wrong. My point isn't to criticize or praise American law. My point is that that's not the biblical law, which is an alien has exactly the same rights as a citizen. And if you don't believe me, it's not just that first one that occurs in Exodus 12. I counted. It occurs 52 times in the 5 books of Moses, references to treating an alien the same as treating a resident. And especially that one that says, "You know the alien's soul, because you were aliens in Egypt, therefore don't you treat aliens badly." And that's one piece of evidence we will see much more, that the Egypt experience seems to have played some tremendous role in Israel's sense of itself and how to treat people and everything. I really don't think you can overestimate that. 52 times. I mean, how many things are mentioned 52 times in the Bible? In Exodus 23:2, it says, "Don't follow many to do bad," which means, if everybody is doing something, don't let yourself get drawn into doing something wrong because everybody else is. Just leave the party. Let them have their drugs. Just leave the party. We all experience this all the way from kindergarten, where the teacher says you did something wrong, and you say, "Everybody was doing it." And about 8 out of 10 teachers will come back with that famous line, "If everybody jumped off a cliff, would you?" They tried that one on me when I was a kid. I didn't fall for that. I had 2 answers that immediately came to mind. The first was, if there's any force that's so powerful that it would make everybody jump off a cliff, I suspect it would get to me too. And my second answer was, well, if everybody else jumped off the cliff, then when I jump, I'll land on top of all of them. It won't be so far down. It's not a good argument for or against. And already you've got it biblically saying you don't do the following the crowd thing. The very next verse says, in a court, so it's apparently giving instructions to judges. It says, don't favor a weak person or a poor person in court. Like everybody would understand if it gave you a law that said, don't favor the rich in court. We'd get that they think that's wrong. But they're reminding you of the opposite too, that justice has to be justice. And if the poor guy is the one who's in the wrong, you can't go, well, he's poor, let's give him a break. You can't do that. The very next verse after that, Exodus 23:4 says, if your enemy's ox is falling, and you have to help him set it up. You have to help your enemy. Now that's something that's traditionally thought, associated more with New Testament, but it's already there in the Hebrew Bible, that the guy's your enemy, and he's having trouble with, his ox. Biblically today you would say car. You pull over and you get out your jumper cables and you help him. Does anybody use jumper cables anymore? You call AAA and they, I'm sorry, I can't advertise for anything. AAA is a business. You call the place of your choice to come and help you with your car situation. Now with Leviticus, I gave you a dispensation that you shouldn't read real carefully, every one of those sacrifices in the first 7 chapters of Leviticus. But you should understand that as with all the chapters of the cubits of the tabernacle in Exodus, if they're spending all that time on it, it's really important. That sacrifice is a major part of the doctrine, the religious practice of ancient Israel. And you should get that what they're doing in most of the sacrifices is showing respect for animal life, and not the way we imagine it in our world. And then it builds up to Leviticus 10. Now, these are important. The last chapter of Exodus, Exodus 40, was the dedication of the tabernacle. Leviticus 10 is the dedication of the priesthood. And the first high priest of Israel is identified as this man, Aaron. Aaron, it turns out in one of those genealogical lists, is the elder brother of Moses. He's 3 years older than Moses. And they have a sister named Miriam. Aaron, it turns out, has 4 sons. And the first 2 are Nadav and Avihu. You would say these are minor players among all the people of the Bible, but it's worth noting their names because you haven't heard them for the last time. They'll come back. Now what happens to Nadav and Avihu is, it's the greatest day of their lives. It's the greatest day of Aaron's life. And he's dedicated as the high priest. Nadav and Avihu would be, second and third in line to be the next high priest after their father, because it turns out it's only for males and it only passes from father to son. So if you're a cousin or something else in the family, you're not in line. And on the big dedication day, Nadav and Avihu, it says, bring an offering, apparently an incense offering. They burn incense. And it says it was, the King James, I think, makes it strange incense. It's like foreign, outside, exterior incense, and explains what that means. It says it was one that the God hadn't commanded them. So you have to understand, incense is very special in the Hebrew Bible. Incense is only used for religious ceremonies. It's burned when you're doing sacrifices, probably to cover the smell of the sacrifices. Incense is not something you burn in your dorm room so they don't smell the dope, I hear. And they come and they bring an incense offering. That is, they are performing a religious ritual act. And it wasn't one that anybody I don't know who to pick a name, God had told them to do. And so fire comes out and destroys them. I told you, it's not that often in the Bible that people get struck down. So this is big and bad. Now, they have two younger brothers, so their next brother is Eliezer, so don't worry about the priesthood. We've still got some people left in Aaron's family. But understand the scene. What should have been the greatest day of this man's life, his two children are killed that day. It's ruined. And people say, what did they do? That was so terrible. They may have meant well here. They're bringing something, but it just wasn't the way you were supposed to do it. And this point is made really powerfully now, and it's setting you up for things that are going to happen later when Moses and Aaron themselves do rituals wrong. You understand that people have very powerful feelings about ritual, and it's supposed to be done right. If you've always gone to the same church or synagogue or mosque or whatever your whole life, and then you go one day and they do some ceremony different from the way it was always done until then, you'll notice it. And a certain number of people, especially the older people, will be offended by it. And here it's even more because they're talking about rituals that come directly commanded from God and only recently. And there's no room for mistakes, and there's no second chances in ritual. And it doesn't matter even if their intent was good. That's why there's no discussion of that in this. We're going to have other cases of this. When we get to the book of Samuel, there's a story where King David is bringing the ark, the box with the Ten Commandments in it, up to Jerusalem. And it's on the back of these two oxen, and the oxen rock, so the ark is going to fall, apparently. So this man named Uzzah runs up, and he saves the ark from falling, and he's immediately struck dead. Now, what happened there? His intent was good, but he's not a priest. He can't touch the ark. In ritual law, intention doesn't matter. In ethical law, intention matters. So in ethical law, for example, both in the Bible and in American law and in other ancient Near Eastern law, in almost all civilized countries' law, they distinguish between murder and manslaughter. Right? They're both killing. And the person is just as dead in both. But if you commit murder, meaning you intended something with malice against somebody and you killed them, that's murder and you're in big trouble. But what if your intent wasn't to kill and you killed someone by accident? Well, then we want to go into other things. Was it because of negligence on your part, or was it completely innocent but it happened? There are all kinds of distinctions in that. So we distinguish between murder and manslaughter, even though the consequence is the same. There's a person, a victim, who's dead. But what was in your mind at the time is weighed in along with what your hand did at the time. In ritual, it doesn't work that way. I don't care what was in Nadav and Avihu's mind. Or let us say the biblical author didn't care what was in Nadav and Avihu's mind, and they don't care what was in Uzzah's mind. We're very happy. Thank you so much for saving our ark. You're dead. If you see a non-priest going inside the tabernacle, there's an explicit law back in all those cubits that you read that said that only the priests can go in the tabernacle, and Moses, who may or may not be definable as a priest. If they go in, it's okay. If you go in, you're immediately executed. So if you're walking by the tabernacle one day and you see there's a fire inside, and you run in and you put out the fire and you save the tabernacle, you come out and they say, thank you so much for killing our tabernacle. Thank you so much. I blew that. Thank you so much for saving our tabernacle, and then they kill you. They execute you. Now that's really hard for us to understand nowadays because we don't have the same sense of ritual that they did. We do have some, like people who say, I would die for the flag. We care a lot about flags. When I go to every gymnastics meeting of the U of Georgia, which is a great sport, and we have a fabulous 10 times national champions at that. You should be really proud of that. And but it always begins in the same stadium where the basketball is over there in Stegeman, and they begin with the national anthem. I don't know why. I get choked. I'm not a big sort of rah-rah patriot, go America, we're the greatest. I'm not like that, but as it happens, I do love this country. And I get a little choked and I go, why is this happening to me? Or, did anybody see me? You know? And people have natural aesthetic, psychological reactions to ritual. Most Jews, I bet, would tell you, if you say, what's your first Jewish memory in your life? It would be Friday night, the Sabbath, the mother lights the candles, gives the kids a kiss. That's absolutely my first Jewish memory in life, and I would bet that that's the most common single one that would come up. Some others might say presents on Hanukkah. You know, I mean, it's not everybody sees it the way I do. But even that, presents on Hanukkah is ritual, not ethical. So ritual plays a lot. The classic work written on this is by the Protestant theologian Paul Tillich. Tillich wrote an essay in the early half of the 20th century called Symbols of Faith, where he said ritual items across a seven-branch candelabra, you name it, a traditional food, a traditional object, a statue of Mary or the saints, anything in any religion, any ritual object starts out as just a symbol of your faith. But it often develops a thing where you come to have real feelings about the symbol and it participates in the thing that it symbolizes. So he said, and he used a flag as an example, that a flag starts out just a piece of cloth with colors, and it just symbolizes your country. But then you reach this point where people get choked up about it, where people say they would die about the flag. They'll get mad at you if you wear a shirt or clothing or something about the flag. If you would desecrate the flag, they want that to be illegal. And so it comes to mean more than just a symbol. So understand that ritual is not a small point. It's a tremendous point, and it's harder for us to grasp than it was for them, because their lives, if you look at the biblical laws, there's a tremendous number that are ritual matters. You and I probably wouldn't spend, a dozen chapters of the Bible, if we were given a Bible to write, on the cubits of our tabernacle, But they would. All right, so Nadav and Abihu die, and it's established in that chapter in Leviticus 10:10 what the function of priests is. So it's a real easy verse to remember. It's Leviticus 10:10. And it says their function is to distinguish between the holy and the secular, and between the pure and the impure, or some Bibles make it the clean and the unclean. Both of those translations, pure and impure and clean and unclean, are really misleading, because in Hebrew it's two different words. The word that we're translating as pure is the Hebrew word tahor. That's an A, you can tell. And it's a strong T. No, that's a soft T, tahor. And the word for the unclean is, and that's the strong T, tameh. My point is, they're two different words. It's not like, the tahor and the untahor. It's the tahor. So they're like seen as two different categories. And it's a priest's job to distinguish those two, because they took purity and impurity very, very seriously. Today you would find it mainly among ultra-Orthodox Jews. Still observe the matters of purity and impurity very sternly. So, for example, matters of impurity include things involving bodily fluids, like blood and semen especially. So that means especially menstrual blood. So if a woman is menstruating, you're not supposed to touch her. And in ultra-Orthodox families, if you look carefully, you'll see to this day, sometimes there'll be a dinner and a man will be sitting next to his wife, and she will take her bread and place it on the tablecloth between her seat and his, which is a hint to him that she is now menstruating and he should keep his distance, because he can't touch her. If he does touch her, since she's in an impure state, the impurity spreads, and then he's impure also. And then you do a ritual bath to cleanse from that. Now we hear this, and that's very strange. Certain kinds of leprosy, which I've told you is not Hansen's disease, but it's various skin illnesses, were regarded as rendering you impure. And this too, if you touch somebody else, it renders them impure. Certain infections of a house, such as they're probably referring to mildew, mold. If a house is infected with that, you have to cleanse the house, close it up, all kinds of things. And touching a dead body. Now, some people who talk about this, especially the menstrual aspect, say that's nothing against women. It's just a reality that there are certain things, like if a man has a wet dream, then he's impure also. I mean, all kinds of, right after sex, right after giving birth. It's interesting, a woman is impure for 2 weeks, for 1 week if she gives birth to a boy, for 2 if she gives birth to a girl. People argue about what that one's about, because they say, well, that girl could grow up and menstruate, so she's a double. So I don't buy that one. I have no idea about that. I suspect that it was originally, here's my theory, that it was originally 2 weeks for everybody, but then they made the practice of circumcising boys when they're on their 8th day of life. So so if the mother's going to attend and nurse the baby and hold the baby and all of that, you got to let her be pure after a week, whereas the girls, they just left things the way they were. I'm not sure that's true at all, but whatever. But I don't know if I myself, not as many of you know, I'm not a woman. I don't think I'd want to be placed in the same category as dead bodies and lepers and mildew. Somehow. Now, different people imagine different things. Some people think that they believed it was like bugs, little cooties, right? And then others say, no, it's 2 legal conditions to meanto, and it's a much more sophisticated explanation. I can tell you, I once studied with this Orthodox rabbi, and he met this group of, they were Jewish scientists who had recently gotten real religious. They'd sort of come to the faith. And so they wanted to learn a lot, so they went to this Orthodox rabbi to teach them stuff. And when he came to the purity-impurity thing, he said, well, now, look, these are sophisticated scientists. They were physicists and MDs. And he said, I can't tell them it's bugs. So he went into this lengthy thing about, legal categories of tameh and tahor. And they went through the whole thing. They're looking at him like he's teaching from Mars. They said, Rabbi, that's not what it is. He says, well, what is it? They said, it's bugs. He said, wait a minute. There's one law that says that if a room is infected and it's impure, the impurity would spread to the next room only if the opening between the 2 rooms is a cubit or more. Now remember, a cubit is 18 inches, so it'd be a cubit square, right? They said, yeah. And he said, well, bugs could get through much smaller than that. And they said, no, they can't get through because they're bigger than a cubit square. And he said, then why can't I see them? And they said, because they're invisible. Now, I don't like to laugh at other people's religious beliefs. I'm just that's the entire story. I'm reporting it. And remember, these were scientists. These are people who believed in scientific method, empirical evidence. Leviticus 11 is important because it's the food laws. These are among the most famous things about both biblical law and what continues among observant Jews to this day. The food laws have gotten much more strict in the post-biblical world, where rabbis added a whole lot more onto this. But just the biblical laws are grouping the animals that you can eat and that you can't eat. So let me just give you the basics of those rules so that you'll get the answer right when it's on a test. Hint. If it's 4-legged land animals, there's 2 requirements: that they must chew their cud and have a split hoof. Animals that chew the cud, like cows have 4 stomachs, so they chew their food, swallow it, regurgitate it. That's such a nicer word than throw up. They regurgitate it, they chew it again, they swallow it, through the four stomachs. So their food is extremely well digested. The whole bovine family fits this then. Cows, buffaloes, bison, all of those, water buffaloes. The whole sheep and goat family fits that. The whole family of deer, antelope, caribou, all of those. Rudolph. So all of them are okay for eating. It especially notes, though, that you can't eat animals that don't have a split hoof. So, for example, a horse has a hoof, but it's not a split two-sided hoof the way if you look at what a cow's foot looks like compared to what a horse's foot looks like. And horses don't chew their cud, so you can't eat a horse. But it especially notes animals that have one but not the other. So, for example, camels do chew their cud. They do not have a split hoof. If you've ever seen the feet of camels, they're like soft. So it makes a point of camels. And the other thing is, the most famous of these is anything in the family of pork, pigs, wild boar, any of that. The whole swine family is forbidden. And it says because they do have a split hoof. That's the only species in the world that does have a split hoof but doesn't chew their cud. And if you've ever seen pigs, they're eating all the time. So you could really make a mistake easy on that. So it makes a big point about pigs, especially. And most people, when they think like Jews, what they don't eat, pork comes up first. Though I know there are a lot of Jews who do eat, a BLT, and they like it very much. But what people do is a separate matter. I'm only talking about what the Bible requires here. Second is among fish. And it says anything that lives in the sea, in the waters, it has to have fins and scales. Now that's really interesting because all fish that have fins have scales. No, I said that backwards. All fish that have scales have fins. There are fish that have fins but not scales, like a shark. But any fish that has scales actually has fins. You say, well, did God not know that? He invented them, But we'll come back to that, why it makes that extra requirement. But what that does rule out then, most obviously, is all shellfish. I obeyed these laws till I was 25. When I was in seminary. I was going to be a rabbi, and then after 3 years of seminary, I quit because I didn't like the food in the seminary cafeteria. And nearly a year later, I had my first lobster. My friends all wanted me to go and have a lobster. I said, you won't believe, this is the greatest food in the world, is a lobster. So I had my first lobster. Turns out I have only one allergy to food. You picture God going, so Friedman, how'd you like that lobster? So I don't eat shellfish anymore. I don't talk that much about my own personal beliefs or anything. I will talk about my personal practices, which is I try to observe all the laws of the Bible. I don't necessarily observe all the Jewish laws, rabbinic laws that followed the Bible. So biblically, I don't eat pork, I don't eat shell, I don't eat any of the things it says you're not supposed to eat. I like shrimp, I liked fried clams, and I miss it, but I always tell people Judaism is a difficult cross to bear, but I'm never sure if that's a good joke or not. I don't want to offend anybody. Then there's the question of birds. Birds, it's interesting. For the land animals and the fish, it gave them, physical aspects of the animal, which is how you decide. On birds, it just lists that you can't eat this kind of bird or that kind of bird, and there's all different kinds of ones, and some of them we don't even know what the word means anymore. So, for example, there's this one bird, it's called a batyana, and nobody knows what a batyana is. So somewhere, I think it was in the Greek translation, first decided it meant ostrich. So Jews who observe these food laws to this day don't eat ostrich. I don't think Batyana means ostrich. I don't see any reason why it should be taken to eat ostrich. And indeed, if you look at all the birds that are forbidden, it includes hawks and falcons and vultures, and it's birds that eat meat. Now, almost any bird will eat a worm or something, but Hakuna Matata, that's different. That doesn't count the same. But if it's meat, then ostriches should be okay in that. And I've had ostrich; it's really good, and I wouldn't consider it as in violation of the Bible. Yeah.
Is that why a lot of Karaite Jews don't eat chicken and turkey?
Yeah. Well, there was a big issue about chicken and turkey because in the biblical world, how could they know about it? They didn't have that kind of fowl in the old. Turkeys were discovered in the New World and all. So. There are some Jews, about Karaites I didn't know. I know very little about Karaites, who are Jews who observe only biblical law, not all the rest of thousands of Jewish laws that developed after the Bible. And there was one, like this major rabbi, who when he first came to America, he saw a turkey. He says, what the heck is that? And one of the forbidden animals in the Bible is the duchifat. And he said, I think that's a duchifat. So he told his Jews they couldn't eat turkey. They later realized a duchifat is a hoopoe, not a turkey. So if you're Jewish, I'm sorry. If you really like hoopoe, I'm sorry. You're not supposed to be eating hoopoe. But I don't even know what hoopos look like. And they have long necks or something like that. So Jews can eat turkey, except this rabbi's descendants. Out of respect for their ancestor, the rabbi, don't do it. So I once had lunch with a woman who's a descendant of that rabbi, and we all had turkey for lunch, and she wouldn't order it because of that. I go, okay, I think it's nice to have family traditions. That's good. So chickens, I'm not so sure. I didn't know that they don't eat any fowl. That's why a duck?
Because they just do fish out. It's the fact that we don't know the names of the birds and that they're reluctant.
Yeah. Well, I think that's fair because I told you I did a translation of the Bible. So when I came to Leviticus 11, I had to wing it. I swear I didn't mean that. They just come. Thank you, Lord. It's on a lot of them, you just follow what everybody else said. And I stopped on the ostrich and thought about it. I don't remember what I made. It's screech owl or something. I just picked a bird because we don't know. But yeah, there's a problem in any legal system when something new is invented or something new is discovered. How do you do it? And you have to do it by legal precedent and analogy and all that. And then that's why we have law schools. It's a very complex subject. Law schools and courts, because we have to deal with that sort of thing. People have made up all kinds of guesses for why it is, you can eat a cow and you can't eat a horse, and you can eat a goat, but you can't eat a pig, and what is the reason for these? People have often argued that these laws were originally for health or hygiene reasons, and the evidence for that is absolutely nothing. There is no evidence for that. Though I did see the first episode of House, it is not necessarily true that you are more likely to get trichinosis from pork than you are from beef. They both have worms in them. There simply isn't evidence that pork is so much more unhealthy than cow, and especially there wouldn't have been that evidence thousands of years ago when these laws were made. Now you might say no, but empirically they observed that people who ate pork, had health problems more than people who didn't. And first of all, it's simply false and ridiculous, the idea that only the Jews noticed that you got unhealthy when you ate a BLT, and then everybody else was missing it. Actually, they didn't have lettuce, but that's not the point. So it doesn't work. And also, we have found in archaeological excavations, when you excavate a site, it's called a tell, T-E-L. It's like a flat hillside with very little grass growing on it because it's made mostly up of sand and stone that is, cities that have been destroyed over many generations rather than dirt. So if any of you ever get to go on an archaeological excavation, you'll see a tell. And what you do, it's like peeling an onion. You excavate the top layer, and then you dig down. And what you find is in the region that is Israel now, that on a site there'll be a period where it was only Canaanites living there, and there'll be pig bones. And then on the next level, it was a site where it was Jewish or Israelite, and there's no pig bones. And then above that, there was another civilization that was Canaanite, pig bones. Above that, Jewish one, no pig bones. So it is a mark, we know already in that early period, that people living on the same sites, under the same conditions, observing the same things, some wouldn't eat the pork and some would. So I don't think it has anything to do with health. And they say, yeah, but with the fish with the scales and fins thing, so that means you can't eat any shellfish, and a lot of them are scavengers at the bottom of the sea. And I'm telling you, biblically, they did not know that.
They're snorkeling.
What?
They were snorkeling. They saw it.
That's it. There's the early snorkelers. Stop that. It appears that the authors, Leviticus 11, and you'll find the same list or very similar list in the Deuteronomic law when we get to the book of Deuteronomy, they didn't know anything about fish. In biblical Hebrew, there's only one word for fish, and it's dog, not dog. That's something else. Go dogs. They were that dog in Hebrew is the word for fish. And that's the only word they've got. If you walk up to ancient Israel and you say, what are you eating there? He says, a dog. You go, no, but I mean, is it a tuna or a salmon or a dog? No, but it's a dog. It's a dog. I didn't say it on purpose. I said it for the hell of it. So don't get me started on fish puns, because we'll... You're a crab, clam up. That one floundered. Let it go. Let it go. So, in short, I don't think health has anything to do with it. Some people say, well, it's animals that were worshipped in other religions that are forbidden. That's a really cute idea, except there is no animal worship in the ancient Near East. I know there's a thing that some of the Egyptian gods' statues have heads of animals, but those are just statues. They don't think that's the god, and they don't think that animals are gods in the ancient Near East. I think, so now you're getting my own speculation about this, that it seems to me that what it has to do with is the most common denominator of all of these is similarity to humans. On animals, all carnivores, animals who eat meat, are forbidden, like us who are carnivores and eat meat. And that's why you can't eat lions or tigers or bears. Please, you have to do that when someone says lions or tigers or bears. And so we don't eat any fellow carnivores. If you look at the birds I mentioned, the ones that are forbidden are owls and hawks and falcons, birds that eat meat. And so when something is forbidden, if you think, what's the order of animals of similarity to humans? At the top would be fellow humans, and cannibalism is not okay in the Bible. Second would be the ape family, and apes don't have chewing cud or splitting, so anything like apes are out. In the sea, it would be dolphins and whales that are most like humans, and they don't have scales, so they're out. And then animals, dog, the whole dog family, a whole cat family of all sizes and shapes and patterns and all of that, bears, all of that, they're like us. They look like us. People often make, paintings of it's an animal face, but they make it look somewhat human, or they put a bowler hat on a horse, which is one of the truly stupid things to do in this world. But we recognize something of ourselves in an animal. So the only way you can eat an animal that walks the earth is it has to be twice removed from humans. It has to have the split hoof and chew its cud, which we don't do. And I think that's what the fins and scales thing is about in the fish. That fish that have scales have fins anyway. But the point is they're trying to make it twice removed. It's got to be different from us in two different ways. And I think this works all the way down. We can start arguing about lobsters, but there's a natural feeling about it. And also, if you ask people who are vegetarian, there are all different kinds of vegetarians and pescatarians. My wife's a pescatarian. There's all different levels now. And some people, they'll say to me, I'm vegetarian. I said, but would you eat a such and such? And they'll say, well, yeah, that's okay. They said if it has eyes and a face, they won't eat it. And I'm going like, well, let's see. What bothers you about eyes and a face? I mean, that's what we look like. And so they'll eat like an octopus or something, but they won't eat a cow. And the whole vegetable kingdom is allowed because, as many of you notice, we don't look like carrots. They're being a whole different kingdom. They're separated from us. Now, you can argue or not on this one. I put it before you as a possible explanation, but at least it makes more sense to me than claiming that it was health knowledge that they did not have without microscopes, or that it was religious worship, which simply is not factually correct.